The Earth, over its 4.5 billion year history, has been pummeled by asteroids. Eroded by wind and rain, covered over with flowing lava, wrinkled and gouged by shifts in its crust. Most traces of its distant past have long since been destroyed. But there is a place where clues to the early history of our planet are still largely intact. The Moon. Scientists have been reconstructing its history by scouring its surface, mapping its mountains and craters, and probing its interior regions. What are they learning about our own planet's beginnings? By going back in time to the mysterious birth of the Moon. We sent astronauts to the Moon as a symbol of confidence in the face of the Great Cold War struggle. Many hoped that would lead to further journeys to Mars and to an age of living in space. Those goals proved too grand in the face of all the preoccupations, turbulence, and change that would crash onto our own planetary shores. Landing on the Moon was a giant leap for mankind. But it's what the astronauts picked up from the lunar surface that may turn out to be Apollo's greatest legacy. When the astronauts of Apollo stepped out of their landing craft, they entered a world draped in fine, sticky dust, strewn with rocks and pocked with craters. They walked and rambled about, picking up rocks, 382 kilograms worth, that they packed for the return flight. Back in Earth-bound labs, scientists went to work probing the rocks for clues to one of the most vexing questions in all of science. Where did the Moon come from? The answer promised to shed light on an even grander question. Where did Earth come from? And how did it evolve into the planet we know today? The Apollo rocks have brought us closer to the answer, but basic mysteries still remain. The Moon orbits Earth at an average distance of 384,400 kilometers. It's relatively small, with less than 1% the surface area, 2% the volume, and 1% the mass of Earth. With no atmosphere, temperatures range in Celsius from -233 degrees at night to 123 degrees during the day. As the brightest object in the night sky, the moon has guided people for millennia by defining the rhythms of life and animating our myths. The nature of the moon began to come into focus 4 centuries ago. Galileo Galilei had heard of an instrument built by Dutch opticians capable of seeing faraway things as though nearby. Galileo, in many ways the first modern scientist, saw this new instrument as a tool to help settle a long-standing question. What was the nature of the heavens, and how did the world of men fit within it? To some philosophers, the moon was a perfect crystalline sphere of divine substance, free of Earth's imperfections. Galileo, with his telescope, saw a more familiar reality. He noted mountains and valleys on the moon, features like those of Earth. Flash forward to the modern age of lunar studies. 1959 saw the first in a fleet of probes launched by the Soviet Union and the United States to shoot close-up pictures, take readings, and crash onto its surface. We learned then just how different the moon is from Earth, with its cratered and desiccated landscapes and lack of a magnetic field. That intensified a debate about the moon's origin that went back centuries. The so-called fission theory, championed by George Howard Darwin, son of Charles Darwin, held that the moon was once part of the Earth, cast off by the rapid spin of its young parent. For proof, look no farther than the Pacific Ocean, a giant hole in the Earth's surface. Then there's the capture theory, which holds that the moon was a wayward object that floated through our solar system and was pulled into orbit by Earth's gravity. A third idea came from the American astronomer Thomas Jefferson Jackson C., also known for his attacks on Einstein's theories and for charges of plagiarism that were leveled at him. He suggested that the moon formed near Earth and gradually fell under its gravitational spell. In that case, the moon should be a mini-Earth, which we now know it's not.
Bypass across the board, Scooter, no action.
The astronauts of Apollo lifted off on a series of missions to get a close-up look at the moon and perhaps settle the debate. Because there's no atmosphere there, the astronauts entered landscapes that are nearly frozen in time. They could scour the lunar surface for evidence of events going back almost to the time of its birth. Indeed, eons of impacts had opened up the moon's interior, leaving a wealth of information strewn about their landing sites. Scientists had already noticed that some large old craters were surrounded by concentric rings. You can see one of the most pronounced examples in this image of the Mare Orientale, captured recently by NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO. The colors showed differences in elevation. The old view was that the impact had melted the rock below. A newer view held that the impactor had actually splashed down on a molten surface. That gave rise to the radical notion that early in its history, the moon's surface was covered in a vast ocean of magma. When the astronauts arrived, they found relatively light rocks known as anorthosites. Their presence suggested that heavier material had sunk toward the moon's interior, forcing lighter material to the surface. The rocks they brought back were found to be strikingly similar to those on Earth, in part because they share forms of oxygen, called isotopes, that scientists regard as blood types for solar system bodies. Then there was this. The moon appeared to be completely, utterly dry, with no evidence that water was ever present on its surface. Not long after the last Apollo mission went into the history books, this initial evidence coalesced into a radical new idea, first presented in 1974 by the scientist and artist William Hartmann. His theory of the moon's formation is played out in this contemporary scenario. Sharing an orbit with Earth was a Mars-sized body called Theia, named for a Titan in Greek myth who gave birth to the moon goddess Selene. Its orbit became unstable, and it headed in Earth's direction. Theia hit at an oblique angle, causing the Earth to spin faster, and debris from both Theia and the Earth to fly into orbit. When the dust settled, the debris began to coalesce in Earth orbit, forming the moon. By then, volatile compounds like water had evaporated. The moon, then, comes primarily from the mantles of the Earth and Theia. That's why, overall, the moon is lighter or less dense than Earth. It has a core of solid iron like Earth, but this core is relatively small compared to ours. From this violent beginning, the moon gradually cooled, and the magma that lined its surface hardened into a crust. Yet it was still subject to intense bombardment in the chaotic environment of the early solar system. Its surface has been hammered by large impacts at every stage in its history.
I started to look at this, and you realize that, as one scientist said, the only thing you can safely say about the moon is its observational error. It shouldn't be there. You know, as someone, another scientist said, that with the Earth's magnetic field and the size of the Earth may well not have a satellite. And if it did have a satellite, it would be very, very small. One postulated maybe 30 miles around. This one's 2,160 miles around. In fact, it's bigger than Pluto. And some scientists don't see the Earth-Moon association so much as a dual planet association. Mm-hmm. It's massive. It shouldn't be there. And then you start to look at it, and of course 2 Russian scientists from the Soviet Academy of Sciences in the 70s wrote a very detailed article for a magazine, called Sputnik magazine, saying that the moon was actually a gigantic spacecraft, hollowed out spacecraft. You know, I feel, it could be constructed from scratch, if you like, or it could be a hollowed out planetoid, because this is a really important area of perception. If you want to put people in a box in terms of their sense of possibility, then suppress the information that can give them a sense of possibility outside of the limits you want them to have. And if you do that, then when something comes along, or someone like me comes along and says this is happening well outside the box, people in the box who've taken on this limitation of possibility go, that's impossible, that's ridiculous. No, it's impossible for humans to do it. It ain't impossible to do. And so we need to open our minds to the fact that, funny enough, sits back in amazement, humanity at this time is not at the cutting edge of possibility. I mean, please.
You think?
Have you seen George Bush? Anyway, this has been done by an incredibly advanced, technologically, not necessarily spiritually, probably not, race of whatever. And I've started to see the modus operandi. And in many ways, it's very much symbolized by the Death Star in the Star Wars movies. Star Wars movies, of course, produced by George Lucas, massive insider. Because of the effect these moons of that size have on a planet like the Earth. When you move the moon close to the Earth, it starts to affect its speed of spin, and it starts to make it go at an angle, which is what the Earth does. We have seasons because of that angle, which makes the Earth, in its relationship with the sun, have this period of years with different seasons. So then you look at the ancient accounts all over the world, and they talk about fantastic cataclysmic events which ended a golden age, which ended a whole civilization. Some people talk about Atlantis and Lemuria and all that stuff. And there are many clear, constant checklist items on that cataclysm description. Whether it's the Great Flood in the Bible, whether it's wherever you go in the world, you find the same thing. 1, massive earthquakes, great volcanic eruptions, a tidal wave, massive tidal wave, and the Earth turned over. If you move the moon in, say it's coming into where it is for the first time, it totally changes the Earth. It moves it on an angle, the Earth turned over. The pressure of all that stuff would create tremendous geological impacts. And what would happen if you've got a planet which is overwhelmingly made up of vast oceans of water, and the planet did that?
Right.
You would have the most extraordinary tidal wave just by the momentum of the water. And then you look at so many different tribal legends around the world. I mean, I come across them directly through Craig Mutworth, the African legends. When I was trying to put this together, I called him the great Zulu shaman, coming up to his 90th year now. And I didn't say, hey Credo, I reckon the moon's this, that, and the other. I said, can you just tell me any African legends about the moon? I try to avoid very much telling people what I'm feeling and then saying, what do you think?
Right.
If they have information they could give me, I like to keep my mouth shut, keep my powder dry, as someone said to me once, and then see what they say when they're coming from none of this preamble. And he goes on with this story. He says, well, we think the moon's an egg. Now, of course, anthropologists go along and say, they think the moon's an egg, they're primitive. But what are they saying it's an egg? Just it's symbolism, mate, please. I think anthropologists do symbolism very well. But they call it an egg because they say the moon had its yolk taken out. It was an egg that had the yolk removed. It was hollowed out. And this is what these scientists were saying in the 70s about it, these Russian scientists. And he said that the legends say that the moon was created far, far away, that it was hollowed out and dragons come into it. It was stolen from the great fire dragon and was rolled across the heavens to the earth. And when it arrived here, it caused great cataclysms, which is what it would do, as we've discussed. And the story is that there were two reptilian creatures, or reptilian entities, better word, I don't like creatures, called Wawani and Umpanku. And they were known as, they were brothers, and they were known as like fish gods. They had scaly skin like a fish, quote from the legend. Now, immediately he's telling me this, I'm thinking Sumer, I'm thinking Sumerian tablets, I'm thinking the Anunnaki, and the two brothers that were leaders of the Anunnaki, according to the Sumerian tablets, Enlil and Enki. And of course, Enki, for one, was very much associated with water. He had another name which was related to his association with water. And so basically, I'm looking at the same story using different names. And the modus operandi, it seems to me, is they move these moons in. When they do so, it wipes the slate of the civilization that's there before. And when everything settles down, they start rebuilding the world, the target world, in their image, as a slave race to them. Now, again, we're talking numbers here. The number of people on Earth is enormous compared with the non-human entities that are manipulating through these human hybrid bloodlines that we talked about before. And therefore, these entities have to keep from the target population the fact that what they're doing. It's all, again and again, ancient and modern, I come across this theme. They are